5 years ago, when I was 16, I lived in a heavily forested area of western Pennsylvania. It was a typical Saturday night, and my mother had gone out to a baby shower, leaving me home alone with my younger brother, Mark. I was in the kitchen, making dinner for myself, when I heard an unusual knocking on the front porch. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from someone waiting to be let in. It sounded more like a few loud taps against one of the front windows. I paused, glancing around the kitchen. From where I stood, I could see the front door and one of the front windows. All the lights on the ground floor were on, and outside, it was pitch dark. The only thing visible in the window was my own reflection staring back at me. After a moment of hesitation, I shrugged it off and returned my attention to the stove. Just as I was starting to forget about the sound, it came again. This time from the far side of the house. "Mark?" I called out, thinking my brother might be playing a prank. There was no response. I walked over to the front of the house and pressed my hands against the window to peer outside, but all I could see was darkness. At that moment, Mark came down the stairs. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. I held up a finger for silence. Almost on cue, we heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking across our wooden porch just outside the dining room wall. "There's someone out there," I whispered, more annoyed than scared. Looking back now, I realized that's when we should have locked all the doors and called the police. But being a headstrong teenager full of bravado, I felt compelled to confront whoever it was. My brother asked if we should just ignore it, but my irritation pushed me towards our gun cabinet instead. I had been raised around firearms and knew how to handle them safely. I pulled out a 9mm pistol and loaded it with trembling hands. "I'm gonna scare him off," I told Mark as I locked the front door behind me before he could protest. With my heart racing, I stepped out onto the porch and flicked on the outside lights. Standing about 8 feet away was a sickly thin man wearing a hoodie with piercing blue eyes and a soul patch on his chin. He had been about to step onto our porch, but froze when he saw me. Without a word, he turned and bolted into the darkness. I instinctively took off after him for a few yards, but stopped short when I realized how foolish that was. Instead, I raised my gun into the air and fired off a shot. "That's right, get lost," I shouted into the night. For a moment, everything felt surreal. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my veins. But then reality hit me like a cold wave. There were at least 8 other figures standing around our porch and scattered throughout our yard. Mostly men, but also 2 women, all dressed in dark jackets and hoodies. They just stared at me with their hands in their pockets. None of them spoke or moved toward me. It was as if they were waiting for something, some signal, and then they scattered into the woods like startled deer. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, until Mark opened the door again after hearing my gunshot. He looked terrified as he let me back inside. "What just happened?" he asked breathlessly. I don't know," I stammered, still trying to process what had just occurred. The police arrived within 10 minutes after Mark called them. They swept our property for any signs of trouble. "Did they threaten you?" one officer asked as they examined footprints scattered across our yard. "No," I admitted reluctantly. "They just looked at me." The officers exchanged glances before taking down our statements. They confiscated my handgun temporarily, but eventually returned it after concluding that we weren't in immediate danger anymore. As they left, my mind raced with questions about what had happened that night. Mark suggested they might have been part of some cult or ritual gone wrong. Perhaps we were supposed to be sacrifices? While that sounded far-fetched, it did make me shudder at the thought. I leaned more towards believing they intended to rob us but had panicked upon seeing my gun. Yet even that didn't explain their eerie silence or how they seemed almost hypnotized by our presence before dispersing all at once. Days turned into weeks without any sign of those figures returning or anyone resembling them in town. In 2002, when I was 23 years old, I lived in a beautiful area of rural Tennessee, where I loved the fresh air and scenic views. I often spent time with my boyfriend, and my 2 dogs, Max and Milo, were always by my side. Max was large and protective, while Milo was smaller but had his own charm. One November night, I had a little break from work. My boyfriend was at work and wouldn't be home until around 2 or 3 a.m. Although I never felt scared being alone, that night felt different. I decided to go to bed early so I could wait for him when he returned. I went to bed around 1:30 a.m. with Max and Milo by my side. Everything was quiet, but suddenly Max started growling deeply. This startled me awake. I thought maybe there was a coyote outside, so I tried to calm him down. However, he became even more agitated and started barking loudly. Then I heard something fall outside, as if something had dropped. Max immediately dashed toward my bedroom door and began scratching at it. I thought, what is happening? I quickly grabbed my revolver that I kept near the bed and opened the door. Max immediately dashed toward the front door. I hesitated for a moment because, if it was just an animal, I didn't want my dogs to chase after it and get lost in the darkness. I decided to look outside through the window first. When I peered out, I was shocked, and that first sight is something I can never forget. There was a man wearing denim shorts and a white tank top. He was looking directly at me, and as soon as he saw me, he took off running. Fear gripped my heart. I thought, should I let Max and Milo go after him, or should I call the police? I called dispatch and explained everything I had seen, including what the intruder was wearing. They assured me that they would send a deputy right away. I also called my boyfriend and told him everything. He said he was coming home immediately. When he arrived, he took a flashlight and started checking outside the house with the dogs. He looked everywhere but only found some damage in the bushes beneath my bedroom window. We waited for 2 hours for the police, but no one showed up. There were no phone calls or updates. The next day, my boyfriend suggested that it might have been the work of one of our shady neighbors who lived a few miles away. Just thinking about it made me uneasy. But what disturbed me the most was why he had chosen my bedroom window when everyone knew we had dogs. Was it just for theft, or was there something more sinister at play? I kept wondering whether I was becoming overly paranoid or if there was truly something more to it. My heart raced, and Max was still running by the front door, as if he was still scared of that man. Time passed, but I couldn't make sense of it all. Had he come with the intent to steal, or did he have a different plan? I had never imagined I would face someone trying to commit a crime. After that day, I felt very alone. Max and Milo provided me with some sense of security, but I was still terrified. Every night, I feared that man might come back. Through all of this, I learned that it's essential to always be prepared in life, no matter how remote or isolated you may feel. Anything can happen to you, and you must always be ready to take care of yourself. My name is Zara, and I am a former military service member. I now work as a night security guard at a remote warehouse. Initially, I enjoyed the job because it gave me time alone and allowed me to stay away from the spotlight. However, as the nights went on, I began to feel that the job was becoming a bit too creepy. This all happened one night when I started my shift. The warehouse was very old, and there was only silence around. I knew every corner of this place since I had come here many times during my training. But in the darkness of the night, it felt completely different. As I sat in my vehicle, I turned on the radio. It helped me feel a bit more relaxed. However, after a while, my car suddenly shut off. I thought it might just be a technical issue, so I tried to restart the engine, but the car wouldn't respond at all. I turned the key repeatedly, but all I got in return was silence. I tried to call my supervisor on my phone, but there was no network signal. My tension began to rise. I thought maybe I should go inside the warehouse to seek help somehow. As I stepped inside, I immediately felt how eerie everything was. The warehouse was shrouded in darkness, and strange sounds echoed from every corner. I thought I might be overthinking things, but I was still scared. As I was passing through a corridor, my eyes suddenly landed on a flickering lantern. It was dim, but in its light, I saw the shadow of a woman. My heart raced instantly. I thought, what is this? Is it just my imagination or something more? I ran away from there. But as I fled, I felt like that woman was coming after me. I tried to compose myself, but I was just panicking. By the time I reached my car, I was in bad shape. I saw that the car's engine was still off, and I had no way out. Then I saw that woman's shadow again, this time at my car's side window. She was so close that I could see her eyes. They were pale and filled with a profound sadness. I kept wondering, is this just my imagination, or is this really happening? I dashed into my car, my hands trembling and my heart racing. I thought maybe it was all just a trick of my mind. But when I looked back at the window, the woman's shadow was still there, as if she were staring right at me. I couldn't see anymore. I locked the doors of my car and crouched down. Then I noticed a strange scent, like an old fragrance. It intensified my anxiety. I thought, what is happening? Should I get out of here? I was at a loss about what to do. Should I call someone or just run away? Then I remembered that I had a pocket knife with me. I grabbed it and thought, if someone comes, at least I'll be ready. Finally, I tried to start the car's engine. I was terrified, but I had to prepare myself somehow. Suddenly, the engine roared to life. I couldn't understand how it happened, but without wasting any time, I pressed the accelerator and drove forward. As I sped away, it felt like I had just woken from a nightmare. I wanted to glance back at the warehouse, but it felt as if that woman was watching me, as if she wanted to stop me. I made it onto the road, but my condition was still shaky. When I went to my supervisor, he asked me what had happened. I told him everything, but he just smiled and said, "This happens often, there are no ghosts." He mentioned that he had been working there for 4 years and had never seen anything like that. I didn't understand, but it didn't sit well with me. I then decided to quit the job. I had no idea I would face such an ordeal. By the time I left, I felt as if I had saved my own life. Now, when I reflect on it, I realize that some things are not meant to be understood. That night became a turning point in my life. I remember that sometimes things don't need an explanation. They just require you to escape. I don't want to share my name, but this is a story that shattered me. I had lost my confidence. That night was the most terrifying night of my life, and it still haunts me in the darkness and solitude. It became a part of my life when I was returning from my night shift. I work at a cafe that stays open late at night. After my shift ended, I sat with some friends for a while, but then I remembered I needed to go home. As soon as I stepped outside, I noticed how the darkness transformed everything into something extraordinary. There was only silence around me, and the moonlight was the only thing guiding my way. As I was walking home, I felt like someone was watching me. I turned around, but there was only a shadow lurking away from the light. I thought maybe I was overthinking it, but my anxiety grew. Something felt off that night. A little later, as I passed through an empty alley, I saw a man staring at me. His eyes were strange, filled with a wildness, and there was an anger etched on his face. He locked eyes with me, and for the first time in my life, I felt that this man wasn't just looking at a woman. He was looking at prey. My heart raced, and I thought, what is he doing? Just as I thought I should get out of there, the man started to approach me. I decided to run into the darkness and hide behind a bush. I thought that if I stayed hidden, maybe he wouldn't see me. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was running out of time. As I crouched behind the bush, I watched him slowly make his way toward me. My heartbeat was so loud that I feared he could hear it. He was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't see what it was. All I could think about was staying hidden. Suddenly, he came closer, and my gaze locked onto his eyes. They had a strange glint, as if he harbored some sinister intent. I tried to steady myself, but fear had a firm grip on me. He walked right past me, and I felt like my breath had stopped. Time passed, but I remembered every detail of his presence. Once he was gone, I slowly emerged from behind the bush. My heart was still racing with anxiety, but I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. I dashed toward home in a state of panic. The next day, when I was reading the news, I discovered that the man was indeed the infamous Facebook killer. He had taken several lives, and I realized how close I had come to a horrific situation. He had been right near me, and it was only a matter of moments before he could have done something to me. I couldn't understand how I had escaped. Did I manage to outsmart him, or was it just divine protection? That man's face haunted me, and I thought about how, if I hadn't seen that bush, I might not be here today. Since that incident, I never go out alone at night. Every night when I think back on it, I'm reminded of how dangerous the world can be and the importance of every moment. That experience shattered my confidence and made me feel weak. Even now, I'm afraid of the dark, and solitude has become my weakness. My name is Sarah, and this story is about my school camping trip, organized by my school at Blue Ridge Parkway. I was excited to spend a night in a tent with my friends, but soon after, I also felt a bit of fear. As we all gathered to set up the tent, the atmosphere was filled with laughter and smiles. However, what troubled me the most was the old abandoned building near our camping area. Its walls were worn and seemed to have never heard a voice. I thought, is it really scary, or am I just imagining things? When night fell and everything became quiet, I couldn't sleep. My friends were dozing off inside the tent, but I kept wondering if that building was truly haunted. Every time the wind blew, I felt as if someone was watching me. I thought I'd take a breath of fresh air and secure the tent. As I stepped outside, the darkness was overwhelming. The moonlight was faint, and everything felt eerily quiet. As I walked past the tent and approached the abandoned building, my breath caught in my throat. The atmosphere around that building was very strange. I noticed the walls were cracked, and some windows were completely shattered. It seemed like this building had been empty for a long time. I told myself, it's just an old building, you shouldn't be scared. But a strange wave of fear washed over me. I felt like I should head back to the tent, but something compelled me to stay there. Was it just my imagination, or was there really something strange? I looked around a bit more and thought I heard a faint sound, as if someone was doing something inside. My heart raced. I wondered, is this just my own mind playing tricks on me? Then I remembered that my friends sometimes joke around with poetry, and maybe someone was just messing with me. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After standing there for a while, I decided to walk back to the tent. But as I turned to leave, I heard that sound again. This time it was more pronounced and filled with anguish. I thought, what is that? Should I go check it out, or just head straight back to the tent? Finally, I turned and ran back. I was scared of the darkness, and I realized I didn't need to overthink things. When I returned to the tent, my friends were still asleep. I told myself, it's just my imagination, it's nothing. That anxiety kept me from sleeping. Instead of closing my eyes, they remained wide open. I thought that if I fell asleep, maybe everything would be okay by morning. But even that thought didn't provide me with any comfort. The silence of the night and the image of that building lingered in my mind. Eventually, I decided to wake my friends. I told them about the building, and they reacted similarly to how I had felt. Together we started to feel a bit braver. The thought that we weren't alone helped me relax a little bit. But I still didn't want to go near that building again, especially since it was just a one-night stay. When I got home, I told my mom everything, and she reminded me that she had always warned me against going to abandoned places. She said that anything could happen in such areas where no one lives. About 5 years ago, when I was 16, my brother and I decided to go on an adventure that would become one of the most memorable and terrifying experiences of our lives. It was a bright Saturday morning, and we were excited to explore the deep forests behind our house in western Pennsylvania. We had invited our cousins, Lily and Tom, to join us on this hike. Armed with backpacks filled with snacks, water, and a flare gun for emergencies, we set off into the wilderness. As we walked deeper into the woods, the sunlight filtered through the trees, creating a beautiful mosaic of light and shadow on the ground. We had explored these woods many times as kids, but this time we wanted to venture further than ever before. The thrill of the unknown filled us with energy. After a few hours of hiking and laughing, we stumbled upon an old fire lookout tower peeking through the trees. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, covered in vines and moss. "Let's check it out," I suggested, feeling a mix of excitement and curiosity. As we approached the tower, we realized it was much taller than we had anticipated, about 60 or 70 feet high. The staircase spiraled up around the tower without any support beams, making it look precarious. We dropped our bags at the base and debated how high we should climb. Lily and I were eager to reach the top for a better view, while Joe and Tom hesitated, worried about the stability of the stairs. Eventually, curiosity won out. Lily and I started climbing slowly, placing each foot carefully on the worn steps. Halfway up, disaster struck. One of the rotted planks beneath me gave way, and my leg plunged through the hole. Pain shot through my body as I twisted awkwardly to avoid falling completely. "Ouch!" I yelled, trying to pull myself back up. Joe and Tom rushed up the stairs to help me. "Are you okay?" Joe asked, panic evident in his voice. "I think so," I replied through gritted teeth. "But we need to get down from here. This place is dangerous." Just then, something caught my eye. A figure standing by a tree near the base of the tower. It was hard to tell if it was a man or a woman. They were lanky with wild hair and wearing tattered clothes that looked like they had been pulled from a dumpster. My heart raced as I realized they were rummaging through our bags. "Get away from our stuff!" I shouted down at them, my voice echoing in the stillness of the forest. The figure looked up at me but didn't seem fazed by my outburst. Instead, they continued sifting through our belongings as if they had all the time in the world. Panic surged through me. What should we do? We couldn't climb down safely with that person lurking below. Lily suggested we try to open the trapdoor at the top of the tower to escape, but as we fumbled with it, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread creeping over us. The figure below was still there, now sitting on our bags and eating our food. As night fell around us like a heavy blanket, fear settled in. We huddled together on that platform above, while listening intently for any signs of movement below. The darkness was oppressive. Every rustle in the leaves made my heart race faster. "What if she comes up here?" Tom whispered nervously. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "We can't risk going down until dawn." Hours passed slowly as we tried to remain quiet and still. My leg throbbed painfully from where I had injured it earlier, but there was no way I could let myself fall asleep. Not with that stranger down there. Finally, as dawn began to break through the trees, casting soft light around us, I felt stiff and sore from sitting in one position for too long. We cautiously peered over the edge of our platform, only to find that the figure was gone. Relief washed over us as we descended carefully down the stairs. When we reached the bottom, we grabbed what little belongings were left. Most of our food had been taken, and began our long trek home. The entire way back felt surreal. Each step reminded me of how close we had come to something truly dangerous that night. As soon as we reached home, I collapsed onto my couch in agony from my injured leg, but felt grateful that we all made it back safely. Looking back now, I realized that injuring my leg may have inadvertently saved us from greater danger that night. If we hadn't been stuck up there in fear while that stranger rummaged through our things below us, who knows what could have happened. This experience has stuck with me all these years. It's one of those stories you share around campfires or during family gatherings when reminiscing about scary moments in life. It taught me not only about caution, but also about how quickly things can change when you least expect it. Even now, whenever I hear stories about strange encounters in remote places or see someone rummaging through bags in public spaces, I can't help but feel a shiver run down my spine as memories flood back from that night spent trapped atop an old fire lookout tower in those eerie woods. I remember that day well, even though a lot of time has passed. I was in my second year of high school, and I had always been a bit different, someone who didn't fit in with the typical high school crowd. My days were often spent in solitude, sitting alone at lunch, watching everyone around me laughing and chatting, while I just got lost in my own thoughts. But everything changed when I reconnected with George. He was a familiar face from my previous school, someone I had never really gotten to know. When he walked into the cafeteria one morning, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wouldn't have to navigate this social minefield alone anymore. "Hey, George," I called out, waving him over. He looked surprised but pleased to see me. We settled into a conversation that felt easy and natural, reminiscing about our old school days and how much we both hated this new environment. But as we were talking, I felt something unsettling beneath his cheerful demeanor. George had always had a bit of a dark sense of humor, but today he seemed more intense. "You know what?" Sometimes I just wish I could kill all these stupid people, he suddenly said, his tone shifting completely. I laughed nervously and replied, yeah, right, you'd get caught. I was joking, but he wasn't. No, seriously, he insisted, leaning closer. I'd bring a gun and just mow them down. My heart raced at his words. I brushed it off as typical teenage angst. After all, we were both navigating a toxic environment filled with judgment and pressure. But as I walked away from that conversation, an odd sense of fear settled in my heart. The next day in art class, George's behavior became even more alarming. We were sitting at a table when he suddenly stood up and ripped a map of the school off the wall. He brought it back to our table and started marking it with a red pen. "What are you doing?" one of the other guys asked. "You'll see," George replied cryptically. At that moment, alarm bells started ringing in my mind. I remembered our conversation in the parking lot, and a chill ran down my spine. But once again, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just being dramatic for attention. After all, this was an alternative school where many kids were dealing with their own struggles. Days passed without incident until one day when everything changed. As I approached our classroom door, it suddenly swung open, revealing a police officer escorting George out of the room. My heart raced as our eyes met. His expression was completely cold. I stood frozen in shock as they led him away, my mind racing with questions. What had happened? Had someone overheard his comments? It turned out that several students had reported him after feeling threatened by his remarks. Parents were understandably alarmed. Many of them were young mothers and fathers who took such threats seriously, given the world we lived in. Later that day, whispers spread through the school like wildfire. George's MySpace page contained disturbing hints about plans to shoot up the school. A chilling revelation that sent shockwaves through our small community. The police found over 20 firearms at his home, though they were registered to his grandfather and kept locked away, raising concerns about how easily George could access them if he wanted to. I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread as I processed everything that had happened. What if those comments hadn't been just idle threats? What if George had actually gone through with his plans? The thought haunted me as I navigated the hallways filled with students who were blissfully unaware of how close we had come to tragedy. I often find myself reflecting on my conversations with George. How easily he spoke about violence made me realize how important it is to take such comments seriously. I was so scared that if George had mentioned my name or involved me in any activity, my heart would start racing. There were times when I worried that if the police had been listening to him, they might have arrested me too. Today, as I think back on those experiences, I understand how crucial mental health awareness and intervention are.